At 2:17 a.m., nothing appeared wrong. No alarms. No flashing warnings. No frantic voices in a control room. Across multiple monitoring dashboards, the indicators remained green, steady, unremarkable. Power loads fluctuated within tolerance. Network traffic moved at expected volume. Automated diagnostics returned the same answer they always did. Normal. Somewhere deep inside a secured facility, a junior systems officer logged the anomaly as a minor irregularity, the kind that resolves itself by the next refresh cycle. He had seen it before. A packet delay. A timing mismatch. A ghost in the machine that never amounted to anything. The system had been designed to handle worse. What no one realized, not yet, was that the attack had already begun, and the most dangerous phase was already complete. It didn't announce itself with chaos. It didn't arrive with destruction. It arrived disguised as routine friction, the digital equivalent of a loose wire that still carried current. The first compromise didn't target servers or firewalls or databases. It targeted confidence. For months, the network had been conditioned to ignore this exact pattern. Slight latency here. Minor synchronization drift there. Harmless, explainable, forgettable. Engineers had tuned alerts downward to reduce noise. Analysts had learned which warnings mattered and which ones didn't. And the attackers knew that. They had studied maintenance logs, update schedules, response habits. They understood that modern systems fail not when they are attacked loudly, but when they are nudged quietly in ways that feel familiar. This wasn't a breach designed to break in. It was designed to blend in. At 2:41 a.m., the anomaly repeated, identical in shape, slightly deeper in effect. Again, it was dismissed. By 3:05, automated recovery protocols kicked in, correcting what they believed was a timing error between redundant systems. In reality, those corrections were feeding the intrusion, stabilizing it, helping it anchor deeper. The attack didn't fight the system. It used the system's own safeguards as camouflage. Logs were written. Checksums matched. Backups completed successfully, except the backups were now faithfully preserving a corrupted state. Every self-healing function did exactly what it was programmed to do. And every action moved the network further from safety. By the time the first human sensed that something felt off, not wrong, just off, the window to contain it had already closed. The intrusion had passed the point where alarms mattered. From here on, everything that followed would look like consequence, not cause. The mistake wasn't that no one responded. The mistake was that everyone trusted the system to tell them when they needed to. And it never did. By 3:18 a.m., the network was no longer merely compromised. It was cooperating. Control systems adjusted routing priorities in response to phantom congestion. Load balancers redirected traffic away from nodes that appeared unstable, unknowingly isolating the very sensors that could have revealed the intrusion. From the outside, performance metrics looked healthy, even improved. Latency dropped. Efficiency rose. To senior operators reviewing summaries hours later, the data would suggest a system that had corrected itself elegantly under stress. That illusion was the real payload. The attackers had no interest in immediate disruption. Their objective was patience. They needed the environment to settle, to normalize around the corruption so that any sudden deviation would appear to be the fault, not the fix. At 3:42 a.m., the attack pivoted. Not outward, not louder, but inward. Authentication tokens were replayed with microscopic timing offsets, small enough to bypass anomaly detection yet consistent enough to establish a parallel authority structure inside the network. No passwords were cracked. No keys were stolen. Instead, trust was duplicated. Two versions of the same permissions began to exist simultaneously, indistinguishable to the systems enforcing them. From that moment on, every command issued had a shadow. Every instruction carried an echo that could be delayed, altered, or nullified without triggering an alert. This is where traditional cyber defense fails to recognize danger. There is no malware signature to scan for. No foreign code beaconing outward. The attack lives entirely inside approved processes, moving only when the system itself moves. At 4:11 a.m., scheduled maintenance scripts executed as planned. They patched known vulnerabilities, closed and used ports, and refreshed security certificates. In doing so, they also sealed the attackers inside, hardening their position by eliminating alternative paths that defenders might later use to observe internal behavior. The system was becoming quieter, cleaner, and more hostile to inspection. When analysts arrived for the morning shift, they inherited a network that appeared stable but felt oddly unresponsive to probing. Diagnostic tools returned answers, but the answers lacked depth, like echoes in a padded room. Something had flattened the informational landscape. By mid-morning, the first operational symptoms appeared. Data synchronization between subsystems lagged by seconds, then minutes. Automated retries masked the delay until downstream processes began compensating, making small adjustments that accumulated into structural distortion. Reports generated from the same source no longer matched depending on when they were queried. Still, no alarms. Just inconsistencies that could be explained away by load, by updates, by human error. Meetings were scheduled. Tickets were opened. No one declared an incident because nothing had technically failed. The attack understood this bureaucracy intimately. It thrived in the space between inconvenience and catastrophe, where responsibility diffuses and urgency dies. By the time leadership requested a deep audit, the attackers had already mapped which questions would be asked and which logs would be trusted to answer them. The system was still running. That was the most dangerous part. At 14:06 hours, the first irreversible decision was made without anyone realizing it was a decision at all. A regional operations manager approved a routine failover to relieve what appeared to be localized congestion. The process had been rehearsed dozens of times. It was safe, documented, automated, and it handed the attackers exactly what they needed. The moment traffic shifted, dormant logic embedded deep within legitimate processes activated. Not malicious code in the traditional sense, but conditional behavior waiting for the right topology. The network didn't crash. It reconfigured itself into a shape the attackers had already rehearsed against. Monitoring tools adjusted, believing they were now observing a simplified environment. In truth, they were watching a curated version of reality. From this point on, every status report became a performance. At 14:19, command and control quietly transferred. Not in the dramatic sense of a hostile takeover, but through priority inversion. Critical system messages were delayed by milliseconds, then seconds, long enough for secondary instructions to take precedence. Human operators still issued commands. Systems still responded. But the timing hierarchy had changed. Authority was no longer about who sent the instruction, but whose instruction arrived first. That distinction never appears on dashboards. By 15:02, the consequences surfaced in the physical world. Industrial processes began operating outside optimal parameters, not enough to trigger safety shutdowns, but enough to degrade efficiency and accelerate wear. Power converters ran hotter. Mechanical tolerances tightened. Redundancies compensated, masking the stress. Every safeguard did its job, and in doing so, consumed the margin that was supposed to exist for real emergencies. The attack was not breaking systems. It was exhausting them. Engineers noticed the trend and attributed it to seasonal demand, to aging infrastructure, to statistical noise. Plans were made to address it later. Later never came. At 16:37, data integrity checks flagged their first true anomaly. A checksum mismatch that could not be reconciled by retry. For the first time, a senior analyst suggested isolating a segment of the network. The suggestion was debated, deferred, then quietly dismissed. Isolation would disrupt operations. It would raise questions. And the data was still flowing. The system, after all, was still working. What no one understood was that functionality had become a liability. The longer the network remained operational, the deeper the attackers' assumptions embedded themselves into daily processes. By early evening, rollback options narrowed. Dependencies stacked. Shutting down one component now risked cascading failures elsewhere. The window to act without consequence had closed hours earlier. At 1912, an external partner reported discrepancies between shared datasets. That report should have been the trigger. Instead, it was treated as a synchronization issue on the partner's end. Trust flowed outward, never inward. The attack did not need to hide anymore. It had already succeeded. From here on, every attempt to fix the problem would amplify it. The system was no longer defending itself. It was defending the intrusion as if it were native behavior. By 22:54 hours, recovery teams had assembled in name only. The systems they were meant to recover no longer existed in a stable form. Every snapshot, every backup, every rollback image reflected the same altered logic, copied and recopied by automated resilience protocols that had done exactly what they were designed to do. Restore normal operations. The problem was that normal had been redefined hours earlier. Attempts to isolate components triggered protective routines that reconnected them. Efforts to throttle processes caused compensatory surges elsewhere. The network behaved like a living organism rejecting a transplant. Not because the fix was wrong, but because the infection had become indistinguishable from healthy tissue. At 23:31, leadership finally authorized a controlled shutdown. It was too late for control. The sequence initiated, staggered, and then stalled as subsystems failed to confirm states that no longer aligned. Engineers watched as the shutdown itself generated conflicts, each one requiring manual override, each override introducing new uncertainty. When the final power down completed just after midnight, silence did not bring relief. It brought accounting. Data loss assessments began to surface. Operational records corrupted beyond reconstruction. Sensor histories rewritten with gaps no one could explain. Weeks of activity rendered unreliable. Decisions made during that period now rested on compromised ground. The financial cost would be calculated later. The strategic cost was immediate. Trust in the system collapsed internally long before the public understood anything had happened at all. In the days that followed, investigators would argue about entry points and blame configuration drift or human error or outdated software. Those arguments missed the point. The attack did not win because defenses were weak. It won because defenses were predictable. It exploited the assumption that danger announces itself, that failure looks like failure. This operation inverted that logic. It proved that the most effective cyber attacks do not break systems. They preserve them. They keep them running just well enough that intervention feels riskier than inaction. By the time the truth becomes undeniable, every safe option is gone. What was mistaken for a system glitch was, in reality, a lesson written slowly and deliberately into the infrastructure itself. And once learned, it cannot be unlearned.